Hello and welcome to the garden. So today it's just a quick sowing video. I'm going to be putting out some more peas and then sweet corn and French beans. So the peas are going to be done as I've done in the past. I'm going to lay those out in gutters. The sweet corn and the French beans, they're both crops where timing I think is quite important. So when those plants are ready to go out, you want to have that so that they're not going to be damaged by frost, and conditions will be generally warm enough for those plants to grow away well. So getting that timing right is a little bit tricky, and of course it varies from year to year. So some plants are easier to hang on to than others. So some of those that you might sow early, the chilies, peppers and so on, it's relatively easy to keep those in pots and protect them until conditions are right for planting them wherever their final place might be. The beans and the sweet corn are fairly quick growing, and they're not going to want to hang around too long in the pots. Oh, excuse me, that's not COVID. So if the forecast was for fairly warm conditions for the next couple of weeks, as it has been in some years, I might even think about starting some for outdoors, but it's been a pretty cold April so far, and I'm probably not going to set those seed until towards the end of the month, certainly not for another week. So what I'm sowing today is going to be grown under cover, and I quite like starting off some French beans and sweet corn and growing those on under cover to get the first harvest. So to the sweet corn, this year I'm going to be growing Swift. So that's an F1 hybrid. It's not one I've grown before. I've grown Lark in the past, and that's always done very well for us. I thought I'd try Swift for a change. Now, generally speaking, I don't grow hybrids. This year there are three. There's one hybrid tomato, there are hybrid tomato rootstocks, and then there's this sweet corn. And hybrid corn does have some advantages over the open pollinated sort. It's sweeter, though I think to my taste a little bit too sweet, but it's also it keeps those sugars longer after harvest. So there are some good reasons perhaps for growing a hybrid corn. Now we'll also be growing two open pollinated varieties, and they're going to go outdoors later on. And it may be that if those open pollinated varieties do well again this year, this could be the last year that I grow a hybrid corn. I'm not sure about that yet. I'll have to see how they do. We've grown open pollinated corn many times before, and I just want to try that once more. I've got two different varieties, Golden Bantam and Stoll's Evergreen, and if they perform well again, then I might drop the hybrid corn. But in any event, I want to set one of these under cover, and that's going to grow away quite happily there and hopefully give us an earlier crop. And from those three varieties, it makes sense to start with Swift. That's a fairly quick growing sort, as the name suggests, and that will crop faster under cover than the other two. I have grown Golden Bantam under cover before. It gets a bit carried away and it gets very tall, but it produces some very, very tasty corn. Not as sweet as I think some of the modern varieties, but with, to my taste, actually a better flavour, more corn flavour to it. For the bean, I'm going to start with Beurre de Rocquencourt. Now, that is one of the yellow wax beans. It produces slender round pods, pale yellow, and very tasty indeed. I'm actually quite fond of the yellow beans. There's another I'm going to be growing later in the year outdoors, and that produces larger flat pods. Again, very tasty and with a great texture. So yeah, I really do like the yellow wax beans. So I'm going to start both of those in these deep cells. So these are 28 cell trays, and they've got a really good depth of compost here, and I suppose they work somewhat similar to root trainers. Now, I haven't actually used root trainers. I've never particularly liked them because they are rather flimsy things, so I've always steered clear of those. But these are rigid and will be, I think, very long lasting, and they do produce plants with quite nice root systems. So I've been using these this year for the broad beans, and they seem to like them, so I'm very happy with these, and I think the corn and the French bean will do well in them. In the past, I've started the corn in quite deep square pots, but this year I'm going to set them out in these trays. So for the sweet corn, it'll be 1 seed per cell. Now, some people soak their sweet corn seed. I'm sure I've done it in the past, but more recently I've just sown them as is, and they seem to germinate fairly well, so I won't be soaking those today. For the beans, I'm going to start with, I think I'll put in 3 seeds per cell. So I filled these cells already with some compost. I'm just going to firm that down a little bit. I didn't press this down when I filled them, so this is not unduly compacting it. This mixture is a little bit more substantial than I used for sowing seeds for pricking out. I'm just going to drop 1 seed in each of these cells for the sweet corn. And then 3 per cell for the French bean. So now I'll just cover with some more compost. I'm not going to press that down too hard. I'm just going to water that, and if any gaps appear, I will top it up. Now I want to give this a good soaking, especially the sweet corn. This compost will hold plenty of moisture, so I think that's why I get away without having to soak the seeds. I'll just top up any cells that have slumped a little bit. So in the past, when I've sown sweet corn into large pots, I've always put 2 kernels per pot and then thinned to the strongest seedling, assuming both germinate. Now the germination rate on sweet corn is usually pretty good, and I don't need quite that many plants, so I should have more than enough from this tray for my purposes. So there was no need for me to double up on those. For the French beans, well, usually when I'm planting out beans, I will have 2 plants per station. I know it's common just to have 1 per station, but I've always had at least 2, and I may well thin to 2 per station again, but I'll think about that when they're up and I see how they're growing. I might just leave all 3. I don't have heated space for these, but I'm going to put them in one of the warmer greenhouses, and I will have these up close to the wall, and I will put them in a covered, unheated propagator. And I think those conditions, now looking at the forecast, I think those conditions will be okay. I certainly wouldn't expect them to suffer from frost now in that greenhouse up close to the wall. But if conditions take yet another turn for the worse, then I can always give them a little bit of extra cover. So if I'm sowing tall growing peas, I will tend to sow them in pots, or then this year I used again those deep cells, and they were great in there. But for the ordinary peas that are growing 3 or 4 feet tall, then I really like to use the gutters. It's so convenient for planting out later on. I'm using a slightly lighter blend of composts this time. The stuff I used in the earlier videos, that was, I think, a little bit heavy for this job. So I've mixed up a couple of different composts and got a blend which is, I think, a little bit lighter. So I'm only partly filling these to start with, and then I'll lay out the peas, and then I can top them off. Alternatively, I could fill these up and then push the peas down quite deep. I do tend to set the peas reasonably deep in the gutters, because I don't like it when they push themselves up as they tend to do if you plant them rather too shallow. So I've got a few different varieties on the go this year, and this one is Hurst Greenshaft. That's an old favourite. I grow a few other different varieties that I find maybe a little bit more interesting than Hurst Greenshaft. But this is always a really reliable pea for us, and I'm quite fond of this variety. So you could just scatter the peas in there if you like, or you could lay them out in a double row. I think that would be kind of normal. But I'm going to lay these out in a triple row, just staggered, with the peas a couple of inches apart, and that spacing seems to work out well for me. I'm quite happy with that. So now I've laid them out, I'll just go over and make sure there aren't any that are sitting a little bit too high. I haven't overfilled these this time, so I think that's not too bad. So now I can just top these up. I haven't sieved any of this compost, so if I find any lumps, I'm just breaking them up. Right, I think that will do nicely. So now I'll just give that a quick water. Now, I don't have any holes in the bottom of this gutter, so I have to be a little bit careful with the amount of water that I put on. It will, of course, drain out of the ends, but drainage here won't be as good as if you've got holes in the gutter. On the other hand, if there are no holes, the roots can't grow through them. So I don't know which way is better, but this is how I've always done it. To start with, I need to make sure there's enough water to rehydrate those pea seeds. And after that, I will be quite cautious about further watering. So that is probably my last sowing of peas this year. I am running out of places to put these. I've reserved a little space for these. After that, I think there's no more room for peas. They do take up a fair bit of space for the crop that you get, but on the other hand, fresh peas picked straight off of the plant, they are so delicious that I really have to have at least some in the garden somewhere. So anyway, that is all for this video. So thanks very much for watching, and bye for now.